For the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukrainian men aged 18 to 22 are free to leave the country without special permits. The change eases restrictions that once applied to all men under 60, but it's fueling a national debate. Should young men, too young to be drafted, enjoy freedom of movement while the army struggles to find recruits? DW went to Ukraine's border with Poland to see how many are seizing the chance.
This border has been shut to Ukrainian men aged 18 to 60 since Russia invaded back in 2022. If you want to leave, you need to get a special permit and prove you're coming back. These permits are often very difficult to obtain. But that's all changed for those under 23. They can now travel freely. While women, children and pensioners still make up the majority of people crossing into Poland at this checkpoint near Lviv, younger men are no rarity either.
Куди їдете?
Їду в гості до швагра
А де швагро живе?
у Кракові. Вже там проживає, виїхав, десь там 4 роки вже живе.
А надовго ви їдете?
Тиждень-два максимум.
Куди ви їдете, Ілля?
В Варшаву.
Що там будете робити?
Місто подивлюсь. Родичів побачу.
Ukrainian authorities say they haven't seen the mass exodus of young men that many critics of the new rules had predicted. Queues at the border, they say, are down to the annual summer holiday season. But transport providers say they have noticed an uptick in interest from younger men.
За цей тиждень дзвінків поступає дуже багато. Питаються, що, як, куди, записуються або кажуть, що будуть їхати, передзвонять.
There's no limit on how many times and how long men under 23 can leave for. That is, until they reach military draft age at 25. If they don't return to Ukraine, men over 25 are obliged to register with military authorities through Ukrainian embassies abroad and face a call-up to go home to fight. Most, but not all of the young men DW spoke to say they plan to return to Ukraine.
Я буду вертатись обов'язково в Україну. Дома то є дома. Я себе не бачу за кордоном і не хочу там проживати.
Тільки випав момент, шанс, треба пользуватися на пару днів, так, побачити різних. Дім на той дім. Хочеться, не знаю, як ще сказати.
21-year-old Andriy tells us he has no plans to return to Ukraine for now. He's heading to the Netherlands to find a job as a welder.
А скажіть чесно, чи плануєте повертатися, чи не бачите себе в Україні?
Ну так, на Новий рік, на свята і потім знову виїжджати.
Назад.
Так.
For others, having the option to leave the country isn't a question of emigrating or staying. It's about getting back some normality. Ivan and his mother Gloria are crossing on foot to shop at a supermarket just behind the Polish border before heading back.
Де допомогти мамі? Бачите, от валізи є. Тут ж дешевше все.
Ну, в принципі, хороший закон. Поки він діє, то добре.
Ivan's mother doesn't think the new rules will see large numbers of young men leaving forever.
Ті, хто, скажімо, мали бажання, вони зробили вже це ще скорше. Тобто, звичайно, можливо, якась частина, але зрештою за один день ніхто не міняє своє життя. В людей теж є якісь плани, якщо так, як от йому вже 21 рік, хтось вчиться, хтось вже поступив. Для того, щоб просто поїхати з терену України.
Critics say letting younger men leave freely sends the wrong message, that this war is almost over and that their country doesn't need them in the army, all at a time when peace seems further away than ever. Its defenders argue that this way at least younger men anxious about military service will stay and get a Ukrainian education until they're 22. At present, many parents pack their sons off abroad at age 17 to make sure they can leave the country.
Let's keep talking about this with Nick Connolly, who co-authored that report. Nick, great to see you. And tell me, what's the government's main motivation for letting men under 23 travel abroad freely during martial law?
So the official take is that this is about making sure that young Ukrainian men keep a connection to Ukraine, because lots of families have been packing off their sons just before they reached 18, before these rules changed, sent them out to do a degree somewhere else to avoid them being stuck in the country. This way, the idea is they could do a bachelor's degree, study for a few more years, and then choose whether they want to leave later. Those that are already abroad can come back, visit relatives without being afraid of being stuck here. We had similar kind of words from the president, Zelensky, talking about giving more freedom to young men. But obviously, the critics of this law are calling this out, and they're saying this is just basically naked politics. This is about trying to improve Zelensky's ratings and giving kind of some red meat to people who are tired of living in this kind of paradigm of war, tired of giving up their freedom to travel for the greater good of the country.
Why do you think we're seeing this now?
I think certainly there is a sense that this is about politics. This is about a country where lots of families are divided, right? Lots of people have left the country in the beginning of the war, and some of those kids now growing up further away, younger boys who maybe left as teenagers, not wanting to come back, losing that connection, stopping, engaging with Ukrainian education, maybe becoming more fluent in other languages rather than in Ukrainian. So there is a real fear about that here in Ukrainian society. But it doesn't really match when you think about the kind of where this war is going. This would be something you'd expect maybe if people here were expecting the war to be over tomorrow, in a month, in 2 months. But seeing as there isn't any of that, it is all a bit weird, it is a bit strange, it hasn't been communicated very fluently, and certainly since the changes came in, there hasn't been a further attempt from the government to really walk us through how this works and why it's fair to other groups of the population.
Yeah, aren't there fears that this move could create resentment among, older men who can't leave the country?
Certainly it's an issue. Imagine you are just a day over 23. You still don't have to serve in the military, that only starts at 25, but you are blocked in, you are unable to travel, unlike those who maybe were able to make use of this a day before their 23rd birthday. There are lots of questions here. There are lots of questions also from soldiers coming back on leave from the front lines, walking the streets of Kiev and looking at lots of young men coming out of gyms, going to exercise classes, sitting in restaurants, enjoying their lives. Why are they here and I'm here just maybe with 2 days in Kiev before I have to go back? So that is certainly the bigger question of fairness is a huge one. Right now, I think people are a bit too distracted by surviving in a war situation. It's going to probably, in a way, even be worse once the fighting ends and those kind of scores are settled. But this is something that is a very dangerous political issue for the government and something I think they are very painfully aware of.
Painfully aware of another aspect, of course, as well, that they are struggling to get people to pick up arms. They have been struggling to meet their military recruitment targets for months, if not as long as this war has been going on. Doesn't this decision threaten to exacerbate the issue?
Well, I think it's a delayed impact, right? As long as that conscription age, that draft age stays at 25, these people who are now, maximum, just under 23, that would be the conscription or the kind of cohorts that would be coming into the military in a couple of years' time. So in a way, it's basically something where the price will be paid further down the line. Obviously, there's been pressure all along from Western countries to reduce that conscription age and to basically have more younger, fitter people at the front lines. Right now, Ukraine's army is, often a comparatively old army of 30 and 40-year-olds rather than 20-year-olds. And it is a situation where I think, all the kind of options are bad. This is a country where the demographics aren't great, and so those younger cohorts are very small. And there is a real worry in Ukrainian society about the future demographics of this country if either, on the one hand, lots of young men leave or lots of young men are killed at front line. Both of those options are not great for this country's future once it gets out of this war.
Is there a record of how many men have taken the opportunity to go already?
So the statistics are quite patchy. We have seen reports of about 10,000 men, that was last week, reported to have left the country since the change in the rules in August, but we don't have a record of how many came back. So some of them might actually, as in that report, have just been going out for a week and then coming back. We don't have the numbers. Anecdotally, when you talk to people here in Kiev, ask about friends of friends, people's family, there are, people who will tell you, yes, my nephew, my grandson is thinking of leaving when he gets closer to the age of 23. There hasn't been a kind of huge stampede. There hasn't been a kind of exodus as some of the critics had feared. The situation at the border is pretty normal for this time of the year. But certainly this is something that just gets people asking themselves, do the people up there in power know something else? Do they expect this war to be over sooner than we think? Because on the kind of news front, it doesn't seem like this is going to be over anytime soon. So it's definitely something that has caused a lot of kind of disquiet, a lot of kind of questioning, and it is part of this bigger question of forcing people who don't want to go to fight. That is the situation in any country at war. That is something that is deeply unpopular. The scenes of the military pulling people off the streets, checking their documents, and hauling them off to training centres. That is something that is very, very dangerous for Volodymyr Zelensky and his government.
Nick Connolly, thank you so much for your reporting.